Hello, everybody. Welcome to the newest edition of Anecdotes Live, where we go and have an amazing conversation with incredible people from around the world. And today we're going to be meeting with my best friend since forever, Jason. I'm just going to go see if he's around. Hey, Sib! Oh, no, she's not on. Okay. So we'll see when he pops on, and then we'll add him to the call. Hope you're doing great. It is Remembrance Day here in Canada, where we remember those who have passed before for fighting for the freedom for Canada and also the freedom of other countries as well, who fought in various wars. So grateful. I don't know what you guys do in your countries, but in Canada we take a moment to honor and respect those who fought for us at 11 o'clock in the morning. So November 11th, so 11/11 at 11 in the morning. It's pretty great. It's very awesome to do this. So a good tradition. And somebody said in one of the speeches that the Queen actually sent a note to Canada during COVID and said that hope is found when we actually care for the needs of the vulnerable. And that's really important, I think, to remember, because we're actually all quite vulnerable to COVID. Nobody is immune. So it's really helpful for us to actually really take care of each other. Hey, Sam! All right, Jason's here. So let me see how I can add you. Oh yeah, there you are. Woohoo! Send. I wish it could be a three-way conversation, Sib. Man, that would be an awesome conversation. Jay!
Hello. Hey, you just got real quiet for a second. Sorry.
How's it going?
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm good. It's a construction continues next door, so it's noisy out there. So I was going to do this outside initially, and I'm like, that'd be kind of on brand for me to sit out in the birds chirping and whatever. But then it's also the hammers and the saws and all that
Oh
stuff. So
man.
not good.
Yeah, I actually cracked the windows open because it is a balmy 18 today?
Yeah. 14, 15 right now. It's gorgeous. Yeah.
14,
So
15, and I also have construction about two doors down, so
not working.
they're no, it's not. So then I'm like, but I need fresh air.
Yeah. Exactly. For sure.
I'm so glad that you joined me. Thanks so much. Thanks for your time and just being who you are.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, those new glasses, by the way.
Yeah, I found a really wild place in Hamilton that has like unbelievably cheap glasses. They only have one style of glasses, but they have like 30 different color coordinations. So these are my olive and black ones, and I have these are blue and clear, and they're just
You're
all over the place.
such a hipster.
Right. Never been accused of that before, but it's
Ah,
fine.
can we be hipsters? I don't
I
know.
think most people can. I am now as of this month, I am 15 months away from my 50th birthday. So
No.
I think I'm past hipster.
Are you planning your party already?
No, we're not. We're
Oh,
probably still in COVID. Like, who knows? I don't
okay. Well, I will be rounding that corner soon-ish in the next couple.
know.
So I'm already
Okay,
planning my birthday party because I'm like, you gotta plan. Like
I guess, yeah.
being
Well, you
so
kind of planning events is kind of your jam, though, right? It's not really my thing. Yeah.
correct. So it's gotta be a good one. You know what I mean? And so like during self-isolation, I was telling some people last weekend that I actually haven't been hugged in 7 months.
Wow, that's a long time for you.
It really is. I'm like such a hugger. So basically, I'm like, the only thing that's going to keep me going is thinking about how I'm going to party and who, and where.
Yeah, exactly. Where? Yeah, totally.
I was thinking Portugal. What do you think?
Sounds lovely.
And basically, have enough room for people if they want to come with their families and stay for a while. Or there's
Yes.
lots of
Okay.
outdoor in Portugal.
There's a lot of outdoor in Portugal. It's lovely. It's hot though. Yeah.
It is hot and beautiful, and it'll be springtime probably because that's when my birthday is.
Yeah, yeah, cool.
You know.
Who knows? Anything can happen.
So everybody, this is Jason. I don't even know how to
Mhm.
introduce you, but you're gonna have to introduce yourself. But
Cool.
basically, I mean, I've called you my best friend since the beginning.
Yeah.
But I really absolutely value your friendship and your perspective and your humor. I always tell people when I explain them that you to them is that you laugh at me, you don't laugh with me.
And it's a full body laugh. Like it involves my whole body. Like it's
Yeah,
not just
and I am here for your entertainment.
but I'm glad. I'm grateful for it. It's good.
Yeah, yeah. And also Sib's on the call. So hey Sib, if you have any like horrible like gut wrenching questions for Jay at the same time, or if you have, or Juice, you can always type in some really good stories.
It's been a lot of juice.
It's gonna be a lot of roasting, I think, this hour.
It's got a lot of juice. Yeah, good. Cool.
Uh, anyway, awesome. So yeah, you want to introduce yourself to people?
Sure. So I am a big outdoorsy kind of guy. I have been, I said, I've been taking young people into the outdoors for about 11 years now. It's a big part of my volunteer life. That's sort of why I'm talking to you today,
Yeah.
here this time. 9 years as a scout leader, in the last 2 years as the founder of a group in Hamilton called Woodcraft Canada,
Oh yeah.
which is like an alternative to scouting, but it's got a real social justice and diversity and inclusion sort of angle to it as well. So we take kids into the outdoors, but we try to be welcoming of all kids, and we try to focus not just on enjoying the outdoors, but on preserving it as well. So that's a big part.
Wow.
Then I'm also the host of a radio show here in Hamilton. Again, I'm on the environmental side called the Environmental Urbanist. So if you live anywhere between sort of St. Catharines and Oakville,
Uh-huh.
and up to Kitchener, you can catch us on the radio at 93.3 FM on Tuesdays at 1. Other than that, we're online and podcasted, and the show's called The Environmental Urbanist, which is my Instagram handle, and it's all about the intersection of cities and climate change and
Mm.
how cities are both sort of going to be very severely impacted by climate change, but also have the most ability to make a difference in climate change by how they choose to sort of run themselves. So,
Yeah, that's a critical topic and really needs to be addressed like yesterday.
Bill McKibben is the founder of 350.org, which is an organization that was initially dedicated to keeping the parts per million of carbon in the air down to 350. Of course, we've now sailed past about 420, so he was good luck. But he once famously said, "Climate change is not a problem for our children; it was a problem for our grandparents."
Oh no.
so, so that's the timing there.
Mm. Yeah, I feel better. How about you?
I'm going to try and keep cheerful and positive on this call because I do have a tendency to drift into the doomer range every once in a while. So,
That is
but
okay.
I want to talk about getting kids in outdoors because that's my love. So,
Yeah, just bring it, Jay. Like no one's like there's no there's no one overseeing this. This is just a conversation between you and I, and I'm like, I'm good.
okay,
And
good.
basically again, like I am basically hosting people that I really admire
Mhm.
from around the world because I really want to have these conversations. And if people want to follow and listen, come join us. Ask your questions, engage. If you don't like it, stop listening.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Fair enough.
So,
Yeah.
so
Maybe I get a little doomer, then we'll see.
if you like a little spice in your life, then stick around. I just want to say
Exactly.
hi to Emmanuel. Hi, Emmanuel. Nice to see you
Yeah.
again. Um, so what was the first thing you said? You said you bring kids out like Woodcraft Canada.
Woodcraft, yeah, into nature.
And so what was the first thing you said? Because that was really intriguing.
Um,
As what?
we're a program about getting kids in the environment. We're also about social justice and
Oh
diversity
yeah,
and inclusion.
yeah.
So,
Interesting. How do you connect social justice then to environmental work? I mean, it's really obvious, but can you just explain that?
well, so there's a lot of different angles, and it's some of it you don't really get into. You don't really unpack with sort of 9 to 14 year olds. Some of it you do, but environment and social justice are really closely linked. For one, it's this whole phenomenon of who has access to green space and
Mm,
who has access to nature in the outdoors. And so there's a growing. We had that incident in Central Park in New York earlier on this year of the birder, who was
yeah.
basically threatened with murder by cop over being in the park and um, telling her to put her dog on a leash. And
Hmm.
so you had that incident, and it really sort of brought to life a lot of challenges folks who are from racialized communities or folks with disabilities really have in getting outdoors and enjoying the outdoors.
Oh
Uh,
man.
so we saw the rise of Black Birder Week on Twitter, which is just a phenomenal event. I've got to follow so many really cool people on that. But just who has access to space,
Hmm.
real social justice issue, not just to nature, but even to green space in cities. And if you look at an aerial map of the city, you can determine the relative value of the house prices by how much green space is in the neighborhood.
Seriously.
Oh yeah, totally. It's a one-to-one correlation. So if you look at
Mm.
like places with a lot of green space, a lot of natural areas,
Yeah.
chances are the homes are very expensive and people are well-to-do and can advocate for those things.
Oh no.
Low-income communities, then you'll see much, much less in the way of green and natural spaces. So that's so access to green space becomes a social justice issue, it becomes a city building issue, it becomes a placemaking issue, it becomes all this stuff. But at the grade, sort of at the age of the 9 to 14 level, like we
Hmm.
have different conversations. Like for instance, our meeting place is in the garden area of a Unitarian church in Hamilton, and the church overlooks a train corridor, so like a big, deep, deep trench in the earth, about 2 stories deep, where the trains run and are sort of out of the way. So we were taking them on a walk around the garden on the first night to introduce them to what was there,
Hmm.
and I asked the question, "Who lives over there?" And one kid said, "Well, nobody. That's a train track." And I said, "Really? Nobody lives there?" And there was
Oh,
a pause, and they said one girl spoke up and said, "Do people live there?" I said, "Yeah, there's a homeless camp down there. There's a handful of people in tents who live under the bridge to stay dry and to stay out of the cold, and that's a place where people live in our community, and they are our neighbors in some sense. Uh,
wow.
they're our neighbors really, and they are living in our community. So what is our obligation to them as neighbors?" So it wasn't really environmental as it was sort of on the city side, but we had this discussion about sort of what can we do for our neighbors who are in our community and part of it, literally just on the other side of a hedge from us,
Hmm.
uh, and how does that sort of change their perspective on who is their neighbor and who lives in their city and all of that. So so like, and then for instance, at the end of the year, we're going to go caroling up and down the streets and
Sweet.
raise money and food. For last year, we managed to raise about 1,100 pounds of food
Whoa.
over the course of multiple food drives we ran. So
Yeah.
it's a big part of our giving back. So it's, yeah, kind of stuff we do.
You should go Christmas caroling to the people who live under the bridge.
We do exactly.
That would be
Well,
so fun.
it would be lovely. Yeah, except getting down there is really, really dangerous.
Okay.
So our insurance company would freak out to sure sort of if we end up hopping a fence and sliding down a big hill to get to a train track like
Well,
this.
maybe sing
We
from a
might
distance
stand on the bridge and sing so
on
they
the
can hear. That
bridge.
would be lovely. Yes,
That would be so brilliant. I would love that. Maybe I could come.
that's a great idea. It'd be great fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Wow. So I have it reminds me of a story. I wasn't even in this story, but some staff colleagues of mine, they were at a retreat for a staff like development retreat one weekend, and at this retreat center they had a labyrinth. And
Cool.
so they were like, "Hey, let's go." And the person was like, "Hey, let me take you through the labyrinth." And my colleagues were a black guy, a Latino guy, and an Asian dude. And their stories were like walking through the forest at night towards the labyrinth and then
Oh yeah,
walking through the labyrinth. They were so nervous.
yeah, totally.
And then they said, bad things happen when
Yeah,
black guys are walking in the forest at night. And I was just like, it just hits you. You're like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, the privilege that I have of
Hmm.
even just walking around in the forest day or night and nobody cares. Like nobody blinks an eye. But that is not the same for other people.
A very powerful leader of the Black community in Toronto told me a little while ago. I was at an event she was hosting, and I was talking about getting people in the outdoors and being more diverse and inclusive. And she looked at me and said, "Jason, they shoot my people in broad daylight on busy city
Oh
streets. Can you
man.
imagine what they do to us if they got us into the woods on our own?" It was horrific, but it's like, yeah, like that point taken, right? So how do we, as a society and as a community, how do we make better space for diverse communities? And if I can tell a bit of a story, this came up in a big way.
Mm,
The tragedy that happened in Lake Algonquin, in Lake Opeongo a couple of weeks ago.
yes.
Maybe heard about that, but
I
there
read
was
it. Yeah.
some folks went. So there was a really detailed account on the Algonquin backcountry page from the guy who'd effected the rescue. He spent 3 hours in a kayak paddling his brains out, and he pulled two people to shore and saved them.
He's
And
a
the
hero.
third guy, he couldn't get him out of the water. He couldn't
Oh
get him to
man.
shore, and by the time he got back with the rescue boat, the guy passed away.
Oh
But
no.
but the point was the family who rented the canoes did not speak English.
Uh-huh.
They had
Wow.
very very poor skills, and all of the instructions were in English. And when
Mm.
the person rented them the canoe, the person in the rented them the canoe did not speak Cantonese or Mandarin or whatever,
Oh
and
no.
so couldn't tell them, listen, there are 4 foot swells in Lake Kapiongo right now. This is a terrible idea unless you're a really seasoned and experienced canoeist. Wasn't able to communicate that. And so part of this question about how we get people into the woods safely
Mm-hmm.
is how do we communicate things like risk and danger? I know when I said earlier that a couple weeks ago, prior to that, I was in Algonquin myself and hiked the Booths Rock Trail, which is rated difficult according to the trail ratings.
Mm-hmm.
And there's mud. There were parts that were like this steep
Mm-hmm.
and climbing over rocks, and it was not a super easy trail.
Mm-hmm.
And the sign at the beginning of the trail says, "This is a difficult trail. Appropriate footwear is required. You should have
Mm-hmm.
water, something to eat," and it was sort of laid the whole thing out. And then there's a map of the trail and what you could expect, the whole thing. I said, okay, went off. And I was stunned by the number of people on the trail who were completely unprepared
Mm-hmm.
for footwear or apparel or clothing or any of that stuff, and they're
Wow.
completely unprepared. But then I realized after this whole thing had happened in Lake Kapiongo, the sign at the beginning of the trail is in English.
Wow.
Significant number of the people I was hiking with, were not first language English speakers.
Wow.
So they're going to look at that sign and they go, what else? And they're going to keep going,
Oh
right? And they're going
man.
to go, they're going to hike Booth Rock Trail in their flip flops, right?
Obviously.
Because that's what you do, right? It's a trail. And so that was sort of I think that's on us as an outdoors community to say, how can we be more welcoming to people in these spaces?
Mm.
How can we ensure that people of color and racialized people feel safe in our spaces?
Right.
And how do we ensure that they have the knowledge to stay safe?
So, I mean, there's that's quite a few different obstacles or challenges. I think one is that the outdoors doesn't belong to one group.
Yeah, totally.
So
Yeah.
if we could, but I mean, that's really hard to, I think, communicate and educate.
It's also really it's hard because no one is sort of in charge per se.
Mm.
Right? No one can say, well, you can't come into the woods until you pass this basic skill,
Right.
knowledge to hike or how to survive a night outdoors on your own or how to cross a Lake Opiongo in a canoe. You're not allowed to do this until you can prove to us you've done that. There's no one who can sort of in a position of authority who can say, well, I don't think you're safe, so I'm not approving you to go out. Because that's not what wilderness is. Wilderness is about, because if you put someone in charge, then you run into all sorts of issues, and a lot of them around systemic racism for people in charge and all that sort of nonsense, right? But in the absence of that, it's just reliant on those who go into the woods a lot to share their skills, to
Right.
help people in high risk situations.
Yes.
So there must have been somebody at that outfitters. Bless you. One more. You got it. You haven't done that in a while.
I know. Allergies, man.
Totally. But yes, there must have been somebody at that outfitter place in Algonquin who
Yes.
looked at those folks climbing into the canoe and said, "These people have no idea what they're doing. This is not a good idea."
Shouldn't that person have said something?
But if the person doesn't know that they're not experienced canoeists, but once they went outside and got into their canoe, that should have started to be pretty obvious pretty quick.
It's pretty obvious pretty fast. Or at least call the whatever it is, not the Coast Guard, but to say, hey, I think that these people are going to be in trouble super fast.
Just keep an eye on them because because one of the ways that the guy affected the rescue and one of the ways he got the final person out of the water eventually was he kayaked back to the outfitter and found a rescue boat that was just sort of a patrol boat that was sort of going back and forth in the water, sort of keeping an eye on things.
Yes.
But if you'd seen that guy earlier, a good idea would have been said, hey, keep an eye on those 2 families of 3 people in those canoes because they're going in the water.
Because it's going to be bad, right? You can tell pretty fast if they have no experience or if they're amateur. Mm-hmm.
And it was.
So what would your ideas be on, well, my idea when I was reading that article was like it really highlights the importance of your what you're doing, your programs, obviously
Mhm.
to really train kids on how to have outdoor skills. And
Yeah.
it's a lot to learn. For me, I thought it just increases the importance of camp. Sending your kids to camp because that's where I learned
Yeah.
how to sail, how to kayak, how to canoe, rock climbing, you know,
Yeah.
basics, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's I think camp is much less of a presence than I think than it used to be.
Mm.
Uh, a lot of families send their kids to camp all the time, but I mean, growing up, camp was not a part of my growing up. I
Mm.
think I went to the Camp Canewin, which is the Presbyterian camp on Lake Sylvan Lake in Alberta. I went to for 1 week. I had a miserable experience. I never wanted to go back.
Oh no.
Yeah, so camp was not sort of my thing growing up, but I was a cub, and my
Mm.
parents camped lots of times during the summer, so I had that sort of side of things. But I
Wow.
think for a lot of kids, the whole immersive thing of a summer camp works for some kids. It doesn't work for others. But
Yeah.
Woodcraft, what we try to do is we try to get
Well, there's
flip
also the
them here. So
yeah. I loved camp. I went since I was a 7-year-old little twerp.
really?
And but I really think as well it's an economic thing because it's expensive.
Oh, oh yeah, totally. Very expensive. And so when we do Woodcraft, our membership fee for the year is $200, which
Hmm.
is we are have subsidies that we offer if people need them, and we've done that in the past. And then a camp weekend away, if we take your kid away for Friday through Sunday afternoon to a conservation area, it's about $45.
Oh wow. Oof.
So within the reach of a lot of families, not everybody, but within the reach of a lot of families to take your kid away for a weekend and have them go on several kilometers for the hikes and learn how to light fires and learn how to use hatchets and learn how to use knives and learn how to do all this stuff. So yeah,
Hmm.
teaching those outdoor skills is really, really important. People are going to go out and enjoy outdoors later on. And sometimes you don't do it right away. Like I have a
Oh.
friend a neighbor sort of down the way who's we've been friends with for years, and they're not a big camping family. That's not their thing. The kids don't enjoy it. The wife certainly doesn't enjoy it. But one summer they decided we're going to go camping and do this whole thing. And he said basically if it hadn't been for his experience in Scouts growing up, the weekend would have been a complete disaster. But
Oh
at the
yeah.
very least, he could remember how to light a fire and how to set up a tent. Like he knew the basics. And so, and they haven't camped since. But so maybe it didn't go all that well because the family didn't enjoy it. But at the same time, he said his skills that he learned as a kid had prevented the weekend from being a complete write off. So I hope it stays with you.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate. So then, what kind of kids do you intentionally seek out kids like from like diverse backgrounds and stuff like that or
So we are getting towards that. So we have right now we're centered in a fairly white middle class neighborhood, which is
mm,
Kirkendall, and we're very very conscious of the fact that that's the neighborhood we're in, and that's the kids we're attracting. So we are uh, our growth plan, which was disrupted horribly by COVID, was to reach out to a couple of other neighborhoods in the cities that are much more sort of diverse and
hmm.
low income and more racially diverse than us, and talk about setting up sort of subchapters in those communities, finding people. We had a nibble from somebody in one of those communities who said he was interested in sort of starting something up, and then COVID hit and the whole world blew up. So,
Yeah.
but that is still our long-term sort of plan is to partner with groups, maybe the Boys and Girls Club, other groups like that in
Mm.
diverse communities in Hamilton's, and deliberately carve out space in the outdoors for racialized kids. We have however succeeded in being very very welcoming. I think on the LGBTQ front in our kids, we have a trans kid in our
Oh.
group. We have other queer kids in our group, and so we've been very welcoming in that way. And I think
Hmm.
that has been really positive. So
Well, I think like even so it doesn't even have to be like kids who come from like low income families, but I just keep like remembering my friend's story. She is a piano teacher in the
mhm.
suburbs in Toronto, so wealthy. And then there's a massive snowstorm, and then her student called and said that he couldn't come to his lesson uh, because his mom was not able to, didn't want to drive in the snow blizzard. And then she's like, "Why don't you walk?" He lived 2 blocks away. So I'm like, even in the burbs where we drive everywhere, we're like, walk? I
Walk,
don't understand.
crazy talk. Yeah, why don't you walk?
So I think like I don't know what's going on. Maybe people
Yeah,
just honestly don't understand that mentality of just like not even getting out or walking or getting, being driving everywhere and not getting out of the
Yeah.
city.
Richard Louv wrote a really great book in the early late 90s called Last Child in the Woods. And it was basically about what was happening at the time to kids, and it's still happening even more so
Hmm.
as they become more and more dependent on screens and less engaged in the real world, especially the natural world.
Hmm.
He coined a phrase that he called nature deficiency syndrome.
Oh.
He talked about what it does to the brain and the body of a child when they are cut off from nature and don't get exposed. And there's mental health implications. There's
Oh.
obesity, there's diabetes, there's lower academic performance. There was a study in New York a couple years ago that demonstrated that kids in a classroom who could see a tree through
Mm.
the window of the classroom had higher academic scores just because they could see nature.
Well.
And so there's these enormous benefits accrue to spending time in nature,
Mhm.
and yet I think largely as a society, and I think that a lot of ways it's the fault of parents my age and older who have become so risk averse when it comes to their kids getting hurt that
Mm.
they've become they're not about managing risk, they're about eliminating it altogether.
Wow.
When you take risk out of a kid's life, you take away their ability to problem solve, you take away their ability to assess risk accurately, and so they
Wow.
get to the point where they don't really know what is risky and what is not anymore. And you take away some measure of resilience from them, the ability to handle adversity.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of benefits to literally just letting kids run around in the woods and get dirty and get sometimes. So here's the story. When we held our first woodcraft camp last November.
Yeah.
So it's going down to sort of zero at night. So they're camping in this. Um, and we have a policy where the younger kids needed to be sort of accompanied by a grown up sort of at all times. So the washrooms were a long way from our campsite. They were a
Mm.
good 4 or 5 minute walks. It was not like right there. You had a bit of a hike. And so our smallest guy, he's 4 foot nothing. He's a tiny little wisp of a guy, but he's like amazing kid. I can't say enough good things about him. But it was the first time he'd ever been camping. He was pretty open with us that he'd never camped before. So he was learning all new things, putting a tent for the first time, fire for the first time. He roasted a sausage over the fire for the first time. All these brand new firsts we got to do.
Oh my goodness.
It's great. But he says, I really have to go to the washroom. So one of the other leaders like, okay, I got a couple other kids who do too. We're gonna make a little parade, and off we go to the outhouse.
Yeah.
Well, he's like, no, I gotta go, and he starts running, and he's one of the fastest human beings I have ever known in my life, and so
Wow.
running like a shot. And so okay, so they all finally eventually catch up to him and get to the washroom, and he's coming out, and he's walking back towards them. And he says, "Did you see the dog?" And they're like, "What dog?" He says, "The
Oh.
dog that was over there in the trees." Was there
Oh.
a dog over there? There's literally nobody else in Rock Chapel Conservation Rock what's conservation area in Mississauga. Anyways, there's literally nobody else in this conservation area. So there's no person walking their dog. You're like, what did the dog look like? Well, it was kind of gray and kind of scruffy, and he had a really pointy nose. And and so where was the coyote? We asked, and he said, "Well, I was when I walked to the bathroom, it was right there. The coyote would be like 4 meters away."
Oh.
And the coyote looked at him and was like, he looked at the coyote looked at him. They both decided that it was not worth it, and they walked away. And which is, for the record, generally what coyotes do. And keep in mind, this is a really tiny guy. He's like maybe
Oh my
not even
goodness.
5 feet tall. So, but that's what coyotes do. They don't bother with human beings because they know they're going to end up at the wrong end of a rifle. So they leave people alone and they go about their business. And so there's all this sort of scare about coyotes in cities drives me crazy. But anyway, the coyote did what coyotes always do, which is wander off. And he wandered back, and he sort of, so he explained, "No, you kid, you just came face to face with that coyote." He's like, "Okay, that's cool." So, very first time camping, very first day at camp, face to face with a coyote. So, is he going to grow up to become an ecologist or a nature conservation person? Who knows? Maybe he'll grow up to be a coyote hunter. I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's going to grow up with that sense of connection with the outdoors and that sense of
Wow.
connection with nature. And if he chooses to preserve it later on, maybe great. If he doesn't, but if he just chooses to enjoy it
Mm.
later on, spend time in the woods, and that's pretty awesome too. So
Also, like healthy respect.
yeah, totally right. So there have been the forums have been full of stories of people over the last couple of weeks, of last couple of months, of people going into the outdoors who did not know what they were doing,
Mm-hmm.
not prepared. And put aside the sort of Lake Opiongo folks, like
Mm-hmm.
it's a real sort of lack of respect for what they were doing. So, for instance,
Mm.
um, there is a natural area in Hamilton called the Grindstone Marsh, Grindstone Creek. It's called the Hendry Valley. It's got a bunch of different names, but it's a trail where everyone goes and they feed chickadees. They put a little bit of black-billed sunflower seed in their hands. The chickadee will come and land on your hand and take a seed, and it's a really magical experience. And the chickadees are pretty bold down there, and so they'll go. And so everyone goes. Hamilton goes and does it. RBG, World Botanical Gardens, who owns the property, is always saying, please don't feed the wildlife. But what they mean by don't feed the wildlife is like don't dump food on the ground, but just, a couple of seeds in your hand. It's not the end of the world.
Right.
But don't go like feeding the wildlife. So
Uh-oh.
since COVID hit, nobody could go indoors and go to movies or go to restaurants or go to bars or do what they do. So they've all started going outside.
Right.
And they've all headed to natural areas without any real sort of sense of the etiquette or the protocol or any of that stuff. So what you'll now see in the Hendry Valley is people literally leaving behind like kilogram piles of millet for birds to eat.
No.
Birds don't eat millet for the most part. What eats millet is skunks and raccoons. Birds don't eat it. But it's cheap bird seeds. They leave it behind. People have been seen like tearing up pizza and throwing it to the ducks. Like it's
That's
ducks do not eat pizza, just for the record. So it's like they shouldn't eat bread either. It's very bad for them. But it's like this whole experience of people sort of pushing into the outdoors because there's nothing else to do, but not really knowing how to be in that space in a healthy and respectful way. And so,
yeah, I mean,
no pizza for ducks.
education, also translation into multiple languages, because Canada is a multicultural country and we just have to adapt. Like, if we actually want people to be able to engage with nature without passing out or dying or creating really bad patterns,
Exactly.
you have to communicate. Whoa.
And I think it's in training, in the training world, we talk about sort of the 4 levels of understanding. The first level is unconscious incompetence, where you don't even know what you don't know. Second level is conscious incompetence, where you know what you need to learn. Third level is conscious competence, where you know how to do the thing, but you really have to focus. And the fourth level is mastery, or unconscious competence, where you can do it without thinking.
Nice.
Sort of like at one point in my life, I was unconscious competence around guitar. Now I'm back to conscious competence. I really have to focus. So, but folks going into the woods who are new to the woods as a result of COVID are often at that point of unconscious incompetence. They don't even know what they don't know.
Wow.
The gentleman who passed away in Lake Opeongo didn't even know what he didn't know. He didn't know that 4-foot squaws and novice canoevers are a bad combination. So, but the people going in and leaving a kilogram of millet seed on the ground in Hendry Valley also don't know what they don't know. They don't know that all it does is attract skunks and raccoons, who then feed on the nests of ground nesting birds and turtles and are reducing the biodiversity in the area. So they don't know this stuff. And so how do we educate? This is one example. Instagram Live is one example. My radio shows, and thank you. My radio show is another example. Totally. I write op-eds in the Spectator on a regular basis and say, hey, can we not do this? All right. So, but I'm seeing one heartening thing. So one of my favorite things in the world to do is winter camping. The coldest I have ever been in a tent is -23.
Ooh.
Yeah, I had a really good sleeping bag. I had actually 2 sleeping bags sort of wrapped around myself. But it was -23. And then the 45 seconds when you get into your tent and you get out of your clothes, because you have to change out of your day clothes, because you can't wear day clothes in your sleeping bag, because otherwise the perspiration cools down and you'll get hypothermia. So you've got to change into pajamas. And that 45 seconds at -20, when you change from your day clothes into your pajamas, it will be the longest and coldest 45 seconds of your life. When you crawl into your sleeping bag and you've got a water bottle that you filled with boiling water a half an hour earlier and put in a sock and put in the bottom of your sleeping bag, when your feet go down and they feel the warmth, it's like, amazing. So, but anyway, I love winter camping. So, but the winter camping forum on Facebook is exploded in numbers in the last 2 months, the last month or so. Like people are piling on the page. What I'm encouraged by is the number of people saying, hey, I have no idea what I'm doing. What should I do to start? Now, it's a little frustrating because those posts are coming up literally daily.
Wow.
Daily, sometimes twice a day, somebody putting their hand and saying, hey, I know nothing about winter camping. What do I do? And then we'll go back and read the other 30 people who asked us, and you'll see. But at least they're asking. Because of all the things that can kill you in nature, winter camping is pretty much near the top of that list.
Super fast. Yep.
super fast. Yeah, that's you go to sleep and you don't wake up. So
Yep.
it's really good that people are starting to sort of recognize that they may not know what they don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and how can they go and ask those questions. And I find that really encouraging.
Yeah. I went winter camping in the Rockies with
Good for
our
you.
friends from university, and
Yeah,
I really relied on them, honestly,
yeah,
because they knew what were doing. They had the equipment, and we actually built an outdoor sauna
nice. That's
with clear
fantastic.
plastic, rolled the hot rocks in, and we were
That's
jumped
awesome.
in with our swimsuits.
What? You didn't like?
It was awesome. We were
That's
like
fantastic.
baking hot, and then of course the
Yeah.
slow, horrible realization that things were turning bad. So then we had to
Yeah.
like zoom from our like little sauna back into to try to get some warm clothes on in the middle of like the winter. Oh, those
That's
were the good old
fantastic,
days.
man.
And we had
Love it.
Turkish coffee. I mean, it was.
Yeah. Mine.
And okay, well, I mean, I want to like say hi to the people that are watching,
Yeah,
and if you
thank
have
you.
any
Yeah.
questions for Jay, please like feel free. Um, hey, Eunice and Danielle. I don't know if you're still around, but awesome to see you. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so then I really like what you're talking about how bringing kids into nature really helps like their mental health and their sense of confidence, probably.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I know I can trace it for me back to uh, my first real sort of wilderness experience was in grade eight.
Mm.
Uh, for me, junior high was Oakley Center, which was the very experimental school for the gifted. And I say experimental because they had no idea what they're doing. But if you're a gifted kid in Generation X, you spent a lot of your childhood being told that you are the leaders of tomorrow. That was the load they laid on us, starting from sort of grade seven on, all the time. You're the leaders of
No
tomorrow.
pressure.
No pressure, yeah. So yeah, but
They
that
did
was the
not
whole deal.
tell they did not tell me that, FYI.
You probably got off lightly. So, uh, but uh, to prepare us for this, in grade eight, we had this thing called leadership camp. To prepare us for grade nine, which now in Alberta is, of course, the end of junior high, and to prepare us for assuming the role as leaders in the school. We said like we're all really heavy stuff for grade eight, so we went to this leadership camp, and we went to leadership camp at guess this Pioneer Ranch Camp outside
Hey,
of Sunbury, right? So yeah, so where you and I have spent many a weekend together since then. So
that's right.
but we went to Pioneer Ranch Camp in Sundre, and we did this leadership camp. So I don't really remember anything we learned over the course of leadership camp in that week, but I do remember the last night was this thing called a solo overnighter. Now we had spent about a week
Mm,
prior to this um, building survival kits.
mm.
So like dipping matches in wax just to waterproof them and making things in bowls out of tinfoil that we could drink out of, and spend the week sort of doing this in school. And so our task for the solo overnighters, they were going to drop us in the woods in springtime outside of Sundry. There was still snow on the ground. It went down to about zero.
Freezing.
And we had to sit there for 4 hours. So this is the curriculum in Alberta in the 80s. So can you imagine this now? Can you even imagine any teacher proposing this to their principal like, yeah, no. That's what happened.
But could you imagine the beautiful silence of those 4 hours for those
It
teachers?
was amazing. What recommends for me over the teacher be like, this is the best 4 hours of my teaching
It's
career.
like when you're a camp counselor and you're playing hide and seek with the kids, and you're like, "Oh,
Guess I
you want to
can't
go
find
get a hot
anybody.
chocolate?" And you're like, "All right,
Gonna go get a coffee.
yeah, gotta get a coffee."
Exactly. So they drop us in the woods, and I lit a little fire on my little piece of tinfoil. So because there was snow on the ground, there was like an inch of snow on the ground. So I lit a little fire on the tinfoil and did my thing and sort of stayed there. And it was like this kind
Oh,
of transformative moment. And it was like, but it was designed to sort of talk to teach us about resilience and about
mm,
overcoming adversity and to show us that we could sort of take care of ourselves. We were in grade eight, and there weren't a lot of people saying to grade eights at the time, you're good, you can take care of yourself. We demonstrated we could take care of ourselves in a pretty harsh sort of environment, which is sort of the
yeah.
wood in northern Alberta in sort of central Alberta in like March. So
So were you scared, or were there other friends of yours that were scared?
there was one other kid who was definitely scared because he came over and joined me. He
Oh,
could see my fire, and he came over and sort of interrupted my peace and quiet. I'm like, come on, leave me alone. But so there were definitely kids who struggled with it. And so we did um, something not dissimilar in Scouts about 4 years ago. We did a thing called Pocket Survival Camp, where we said to these kids, "We're going to a camp in outside of St. Catharines, and your goal is to spend the night in the woods with only what you could carry in your pockets."
oof, no way.
So these are sort of these are sort of like 11 to 14-year-olds. And so we were told the forecast for that night was like 5 or 6 degrees and clear. So it was going to be cool, but not freezing.
Oof.
Um, the forecast lied.
Oh,
Was this particular place, I had a little thermometer on my zipper pull, and I figure it went down to about -2. And so kids were sleeping in tarp shelters, they were in debris shelters, they were. But the concession we made was that we were gonna get the firewood, and we were gonna keep a fire going all night long. The leaders, so that they had a place they could go to warm up if they got too cold.
hmm.
And some kids literally stayed in their shelters all night and just shivered, and others got up and um, stood around the campfire like as early as sort of 4 or 5 a.m. That was it. They couldn't do it anymore. But it was a real sense of achievement for those who made it through the night. Say, listen, I could do this. I could literally spend a night in the woods with nothing but what I could carry in my pockets, and the sense of accomplishment of these kids' part was pretty amazing. So
Way to go. I
they
mean,
did it again a year later, but they waited until June. June
that's not
is
fair.
better than April for this event.
Well, hey, so Sib has a question. In the fight to bring nature into our cities, which is really actually a great question, how do you balance creating wild places in the urban environment, both small and large, and how do we make that happen?
So, this is what my show was about on Tuesday. In part, was about natural pollinators in urban landscapes, and so there are, in terms of wild spaces in cities, that can be a challenge. But in terms of bringing nature into cities, that's a lot easier. In terms of the cities are
Mm,
actually kind of ecological safety zones for a lot of species that are being wiped out by pesticides in and herbicides in the agricultural areas. They're kind of a safe place for a lot of endangered natural pollinators and
ew.
that they can't really make a go of it in the countryside anymore because of the intense use of pesticides. So that's something that was really surprised me. Like I never think of this city as a nature safe spot, but they kind of are.
Oh, it's so interesting. Yeah, I have
Yeah,
not thought about that.
but there are various things you can do in cities and to preserve or create wild spaces. But the main thing that needs to happen is someone has to have the political will to stand up to developers.
Mm,
That's the main thing. And
money.
so,
Mhm.
yeah, money. And so there has one of the folks I interviewed for my show a while ago, Ariel Gordon, who's the author of a phenomenal book that my wife published called Treed, which is about urban trees. And she has a couple of chapters about the Assiniboine Forest in Winnipeg. And the Assiniboine Forest exists almost entirely. It's this big wild area in the middle of Winnipeg. It
Mhm.
exists entirely because at some point somebody put their foot down and said, we are not going to let this go to a developer.
Wow, that's
We're
good.
going to not let it develop. And then once it became a beloved jewel of the community,
Right.
then there was no risk of it getting developed because any developer who tried to touch it would get pilloried. So,
Yeah.
but the first little while, the city had to sort of put their foot down and say, we're not going to develop this area.
Wow.
And that's as cities expand, there's opportunities to say we're going to keep this land not developed,
Hmm.
we're going to keep this land sort of more pristine. But as cities in already established areas,
Hmm.
finding those wild spaces is really, really a challenge, and finding
Hmm.
a place that can be converted back to a wild space because the denser the population, the more people want to use it per se. And by use, they usually mean playing sports or having picnics.
Hmm.
Right? And so they don't mean so much sort of playing in the woods. So
Hmm.
I wish there was a good answer to Siobhan's question, but it's a really sticky one that we're really fortunate in Hamilton that we have the escarpment running right through the city. And in Toronto, there's the ravine system, which has been amazing.
Which I
Um,
love.
right, right. So when we lived in Toronto, we spent a lot of time in the ravines,
Yeah.
and that's where I saw my first fireflies were in the Don Valley Ravine, just outside of just
No
outside.
way. I didn't know that they lived here.
Yeah, they're awesome. Fireflies are amazing. So
Oh,
yeah, they're wonderful.
well,
So
that's where I go to watch the salmon spawn. And I basically go and camp
yeah,
out on a
cool.
rock on the river in the Don River and watch and just hang out for a long time watching the salmon because I find them to be really inspiring.
They're amazing. It's so cool. And
Hmm.
yeah, that the connection with nature that you can take kids there, you can go there and you can experience nature in the city. And so, but if you've already got a sort of really strong built up area, returning areas to natural lands is really, really challenging and basically needs to
Well,
have somebody with really, really deep pockets who's willing to uh, purchase the land and return it to its natural state.
I mean, it's kind of what they're
One
doing.
example,
Huh?
one example in Hamilton of a park that has a bit of sort of wildness attached to it is, oh, what's the park called? It's Jackie Washington Park. So Jackie Washington was a bluesman in Hamilton for a long time, who was famous for just being a great guy and an amazing musician. But there was an industrial site in Hamilton called Plastimet, and Plastimet caught on fire just
Oh,
before we moved to Hamilton. And the fire burned for like a week.
oh no.
Every firefighter who was involved, or like a lot of the firefighters who were involved, came down with cancer.
Oh
Uh,
no.
it was the pollution was horrendous. So in the end, once they finally got the fire out, all they could do was slap a thick layer of concrete over what was left of the
Oh
empty.
man, no.
There was no remediation. It was just not going to be possible.
Yeah.
So they slapped a thick layer of concrete over it and said, "We're done." What they did on top of that, though, is they put a layer of dirt and then a layer of grass and a layer of trees on top of that. And so it was sort of a story of a horror show environmentally to be
Yeah.
kind of turned around into a good news story, because this part of town, which was very, very short on green space and very lacking in those kind of amenities, now had a park.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes these tragic situations can be turned into good ones.
Well, closer to home for me is the Leslie Spit.
Yes.
So City of Toronto is very developed. I don't imagine we're gonna like undevelop and return back to its natural habitat. But so they've taken like all these buildings that like concrete buildings from like what 70s, 80s and smushed them up and like put them in Lake Ontario to make a like a park.
Yeah,
And
totally.
one of the cool things is I heard that this one guy was doing a PhD um in actually studying because the seeds that were in the concrete from the 70s and 80s are blooming.
That's
And they
wild.
what they thought was actually already extinct plants are
Wow.
actually now like growing in the Leslie Spit.
That's so cool.
You're like, oh,
Fantastic.
that's
I
incredible! Like that
need to
that
get
could
on my phone.
happen. I'm so happy. And really, who knew that we could mine these like super old like building crushed concrete to mine for seeds.
And in terms of birding population, Leslie Spit is a birding mecca. So if you're into
I am.
seabirds, birds, and
Yep.
all that sort of thing, Leslie Spit there's an awful lot of birders who go down to the Spit every spring and every fall just to
They're
migrate. It's an amazing place.
they're also adorable. These birders, they're like, I do not know what I'm doing. I just go with my binoculars and I try to learn as much as possible.
Yeah.
And then these really cute older guys are like, and do you know what kind of bird that is? And I'm like, it
Mhm.
is a bird.
Mhm.
They're like, you probably know the husband. And I'm like, oh, a Colonel?
You taught the kid in high school.
And they're like, yes, it is a female cardinal. I'm like, whoof. But it's so awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
that's
really
funny.
good. So I love the
We,
Leslie
we
Spit.
had we had a mutual friend in university who I once went for fries at Peter's Driving with, and we sat on the parking lot and we watched the birds, the big and small, hopping around, helping themselves to fallen fries. And she kept laughing like hilariously. She's watching the birds. They sort of hopped along because they don't walk; they hop on both feet at the same time. Bung, 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 bung. And she's watching the birds hop along, and she just kept howling with laughter. And I have to admit, I've never really looked at birds the same way since. Like it just now, birds are really funny, like all
They
the
are.
time.
They're
They really are. They just you sort of you're gonna watch them and like, okay, that's a funny thing to do. Yeah,
it's adorable.
love them.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah.
Um, so good. Um,
Yeah.
hey, I had a friend. My friend, who is actually my next guest for my next Instant Anecdotes Live guest,
Cool.
is an environmentalist, and he has a
Cool.
quote. So I'm going to read you his quote, and I'd love
Mhm.
for your like response. So I'm going to try to read it. He says, "Environmental problems are people problems, and
Mhm.
when the environment is not healthy, people are not healthy."
Mhm. Yeah,
So
totally. Good. And it's unhealthy people, and generally their lust for profit that create unhealthy environments.
exactly,
Yeah. So I 100% agree. And I think if people don't have access to natural space into the environment, they are also less healthy.
exactly. So I was thinking like this is like coming at it from the opposite, like not opposite, because I think you guys are aligned in like conservation and environmentalism, but also just the impact on people. And if we don't get out, we are really going to be super mentally unhealthy and spiritually and emotionally probably too,
Yeah, and physically unhealthy too. And
and
so
physically.
your friend's absolutely right. I think that's I challenge for me is that I always struggle with people who quantify saving the environment in human terms.
Mm,
I guess that that's something we need to do in order to sort of sell the whole notion of saving the environment to people. But um, to me, I've always wished that we could look at the environment as not as something we should save for our benefit, but as something we are really a fairly small part of. And look
yes.
at and sort of have a much more respect for it and have a better consideration for what our role is in
Yeah.
and look at it that way. And there's some folks in the UK doing some writing. Um, so here's where I get all doomer. There's a group in the United Kingdom called the Dark Mountain Project. And they are a group who basically said, we don't think we're getting out of this whole environmental thing with anything like a world like we're used to seeing now.
Mm,
And so they've engaged poets and writers and musicians to envision a world in the future where humanity is much more in harmony with nature. And so some of my favorite environmental writings come out of this whole Dark Mountain Project, which is one's hand is fairly sort of bleak look at what our future is short term, and on
mm,
the other hand, a very hopeful look at what our future is in the medium to long term about how we could possibly live in better harmony with nature. And to me, I recognize that we need to sell people on the idea of saving the planet, otherwise we're
mhm,
not going to. But I just wish there was a way to do that other than saying, we must preserve these plants because there could be future medicines that we can derive from them. Well,
right.
no, we must preserve these plants because they're beautiful and because they're an integral part of their ecosystem. And part of having a healthy ecosystem is having a healthy planet means you have a healthy place for us to live. So that's my one thing
That's
about
cool. Well, I mean, I like what they're doing in the UK because I feel like we need to we lack imagination. Like we don't know what the possibilities are. So I feel like it's really helpful for the artists to help us see and imagine that there is a different way and that we can live differently. So I appreciate
and
that.
the species, we define ourselves by the stories we tell. Right,
Right.
we define our world through the lens of the stories we tell. And so I think the story we've told for the last 100 years or so has been that we need to make more money, we need to produce more goods, and we need to consume more. And that's been the dominant narrative. More so than any religion, there's been the myth of progress that has been the dominant sort of Western narrative for the last 100 years. And so I think it's really up to artists, musicians, and poets to start telling a different story,
Hmm.
but that looks like in the absence of that.
Hmm.
Because you can't keep having consuming more and more on a planet that's finite. Eventually,
Hmm.
you're going to run out of stuff. And so I think it's helpful that artists and
Hmm.
unfortunately right now part of the most popular genre is post-apocalyptic fiction. In a lot of ways, it's sort of maybe that's not a particularly hopeful
Well,
looking thing, but
some people are driven by fear. So you know what I
yeah,
mean?
it's a cautionary tale. Yeah, so
You're like, oh, it's gonna be bad. So you're like, oh, must do something.
maybe I better
So
reflect about things after all.
for those of us who's on the call, and if you have a question for Jason, please feel free to like make a comment. Um, Otherwise, we're just gonna keep chatting. Um,
Mhm.
I was
So
wondering what you thought about during COVID. Everybody is to like stay inside, I think, but we've kind of like tried to otherwise get out. But I think that that's been such a nice pause for nature. I bet you the animals are like, whoa, what happened to all the humans?
for a brief period of time they were. So for a brief period, there was this whole sort of nature reset. We're in the heart of the lockdown, at least in Canada, which is sort of end of March, most of April, when we were really sort of tightly restricted, bit of May. There was a real sense of sort of, oh, what happened to the people? Like nature's back, and there was carbon emissions were plummeted, like all these sort of things were improved as nature. And I'll admit there were times where we found places where we could go in nature where there were no other people that were allowed, and we explored those places, and it was glorious to be out there when there was literally nobody around. It was a magical,
Oh,
and so
love it.
we discovered a bunch of new places that we hadn't really known before because these were crown land or they were
Mm,
parts of the Bruce Trail that we could go on or whatever. So we went to these places and had these experiences. But then what happened was there was this rebound effect,
mm,
and opened up and people could go out and leave their houses again. They couldn't go anywhere but outdoors.
mm-hmm.
And so it's been kind of a double-edged sword, I think, for nature. And for the first little bit, it was like, whew, this is great. And then it was like, where did all these people come from? So
Yeah.
I think we need to. Um, I think for some people, it was a very different experience because for us, we had this gigantic backyard right here where we could go and just we could garden and we could do a lot of
Mm.
things, be outside in a way that didn't require us to leave our property.
Hmm.
So for the 14 days that our youngest was self-isolating because there was somebody in his class had COVID
Mm.
um, just a couple weeks ago, he was able to go outside every day and be outdoors and play and do those things without ever leaving our property. It was great.
That's
But if you live in a high rise, if you live in an apartment, if you live in a dense urban setting and you don't have that access to nature, then that was, I think for folks like that, I think it was really, really challenging to be, yeah, exactly, right? You live in an apartment on top of a house,
hmm.
like in an area with not with a ton of lot that doesn't have a ton of green space, right?
Nope.
So so I think for folks like that, it would have been a real challenge
Hmm.
uh, to do that.
That was basically my biggest craving. I just craved going outdoors. Like I just needed to go hiking, but I knew I couldn't. So I built up my balcony to be my happy place.
Cool.
Lots of flowers, lots of plants, lots of and made it try to make it as comfortable as possible because I knew I was going to spend so much time out there.
Yeah, totally.
But it's
And
going
I
to
know.
be even more difficult though because we're going to go into winter.
Yeah, totally. So as Canadians, we're in Canada, we're in a northern country. We need to learn how to embrace being outside in winter. We did this 50, 60 years ago. Winter sports were very popular. It was very common. Everybody went outside in winter. 50 years ago, nobody was flying to Mexico for a week in the February to get their break. Uh, I know winter's not for everyone, but if there's a saying that's circulated on the internet a lot. If you do not take joy in the snow, you will have less joy in your life with the
Mm.
same amount of
Oh, so I
snow.
I should just invest into a pair of like snowshoes or something. And
Get a good pair of winter boots and get prepared to go out and enjoy winter because it's coming. We don't know how serious or mild it's going to be,
hmm.
but if we get to the point where we can go and enjoy the winter and enjoy being outside, and it's just both the British and the Norwegians share a phrase, which is that there is no such thing as bad weather. There's just inadequate clothing. Norwegians goes the cold, British goes the wet, but that's what they do. So I think
Yeah.
if we just get to a point where we can bundle up and dress in layers and go outside and tromp around and enjoy our cities and our natural spaces in the same way we not in the same way, but to the same extent we do in the summertime, I think we will have a much easier winter, especially because I think a lot of people are thinking, well, Manitoba is just locked down, right?
Hmm.
Manitoba is done, and I think a lot of people in Ontario are thinking that Ford is going to push us right until just after Christmas, and then we'll probably be in a similar situation in January. So if not sooner, if you look at the cases for the last couple of weeks, last week, I mean, like the last 5 days, we set records in new cases in Ontario. So who knows with us? But if we hit into lockdown in the middle of winter,
Hmm.
the whole notion of hygge, which is that Danish notion of being cozy indoors, Hygga, hygge, is that's one thing about being cozy indoors and lighting your candles and having your flannel and doing all that's great. But you got to get outside. You got to go out into the world and into nature. And you got to put on your big winter boots and you got to put your scarf in your tooth and go out and throw snowballs or stomp around or just look at the night sky. The
Yes.
night sky in the winter is a totally different thing. You don't have the heat from the cities obscuring the view. You
Right. Less
have
smog.
you have the constellation Orion, and if you look at Orion, it's the three stars that have an angle, and the two stars up top and the two stars below. That's Orion.
Hmm.
But if you look just below the belt, where the three stars are, you can see the Orion Nebula
Oh,
with the naked eye on a
wow.
clear winter night. You can see it. You don't need a telescope. You don't need binoculars. You just look up and you kind of let your eyes kind of go slightly out of focus. You'll see a fuzzy patch, and that's the Orion Nebula. So the stargazing in the winter is second to none. It's amazing.
That is awesome. Yeah, I mean, yes. I have taken into cycling, but yeah, I think I might just run around with boots and mitts and gloves and a hat. It'll be good.
So when we did our last camp for Woodcraft, it was in March. It was the weekend before the schools were closed in March. We
Mm.
snuck just under the wire. But it was winter camp. It was at about -5 at night, but there was snow everywhere at Valen's conservation area. And we took these kids out for a 7 kilometer hike. and they were exhausted. They were in bed by 8 that night. It was awesome.
Yeah.
But on the hike, we stopped at a big clearing at basically an unused group camp area, and we lit a fire and we roasted some hot dogs. But there was snow, and if you give a chance for kids to play in snow, they will play in snow.
That's
They
awesome.
built the largest sort of snowman ball I've ever seen. It was almost as tall as I was.
Whoa.
They were having sort of very sort of gentle snowball fights. They were trudging paths in the snow. They were
Yeah.
making snowmobiles. They were doing kid stuff in the snow. So if you
That's
have kids, don't be afraid to get them outside, get them in the snow.
that's awesome. I mean, yeah. In
And if
Calgary,
you're grown up, yeah, Calgary, right?
we did everything in the snow.
If you didn't like the snow in Calgary, you're in big trouble.
You were toast. So where can we find you?
Oh my goodness. You can find me on Twitter at Jano Allen, Janoallen. That's my rabble rousy disturber of the peace sort of side.
Nice.
Um, quick story: I had somebody come in to do a radio interview to the station in February, back when we were still doing the show at CFMU in McMaster. And about 10 minutes before we went live, we're sitting in this sort of lobby area, sort of waiting on the couches. And about 10 minutes before we're live, she turns to me and says, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, sure." She said, "Who are you?"
You're like, well, let me tell you.
I didn't have an answer, but her main sort of knowledge of me was through Twitter, where I have this gets a bit of a reputation as a disturber of the peace. So anyway, that's Twitter is Jano Allen. Instagram, and I got to be honest, I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be on Instagram, but it's Environmental Urbanist on Instagram right now. On Facebook, is search for Jason Allen, the Environmental Urbanist, and on cfmu.ca Tuesday afternoons at 1 p.m. or podcasted at any time. Again, search the Environmental Urbanist.
Yeah, great. And then also your website.
Yeah, it's more a work thing. I mean, work is
Okay.
pretty boring. I basically design e-learning courses for very, very cautious government organizations. So I love them all. I love my clients dearly, but they're very cautious folks, and I
Right, right.
design e-learning courses. So
It's
the
good to know
website.
it's good to know your clients. And
Yeah.
what does the future look like for you?
Oh my goodness. Lots more woodcraft. Lots more getting kids running around in the woods.
Yeah,
Radio show is going to take a bit of a turn. It's going to sort of the focus is going to be less on Hamilton this year and more sort of on Ontario and more national.
great.
Yeah, so I can hopefully sort of expand that sort of because I really have I've talked to a lot of the folks in Hamilton who are sort of the obvious sort of people to talk to. Although I keep finding more, but it'd be more of a broadening of that. And woodcraft again, we're under a lot of pressure to expand, a lot of pressure to add kids and possibly add.
Good.
So there's a lot of people out there who like what we're doing
Yeah.
and want to know more. So we're gonna sort of figure out. We've just added a couple new leaders for the first time. Two folks who had no real sort of experience as Cub or Scout or Guide leaders. So they're coming to us for the first time. So we got to figure out how we're going to onboard them properly. And once we get our heads around that, then we can sort of expand the program.
That's awesome because I'm sure
Yeah.
many more kids would love it. So I
Yes.
feel like we've come to time.
Yes, cool.
Thank you so much, Jason. So good to
Okay.
see you. Love
Yeah,
your vision. Love your what you're just doing. So yeah. So keep going.
thanks. Appreciate
All right. Talk to you later.
it. Bye.
Bye.